I'm Mitch Maley with another episode of Punk Rock Politics. If you pay even somewhat close attention to the political world, you're probably aware that there are two Senate runoffs that will take place in Georgia on January 6th, and that they'll determine whether Democrats or Republicans control the chamber. First, let's take a look at how we got here. The reason two seats were on the ballot is that Republican Senator Johnny Isaacson resigned from his seat before the end of his term because of health reasons, in which case the governor appoints a replacement to serve until a special election can be held on the next ballot, the winner of which serves out the remainder of the term. Georgia is one of 10 states, mostly in the South, that require a candidate to get at least 50% of the vote to win a race. If that doesn't happen, the top two candidates head to a runoff. Republicans currently hold a 52-48 lead in the chamber, which means that if Democrats were to pick up both seats, representation would be tied, giving Vice President Kamala Harris the tie-breaking vote, and Democrats control over all three branches of the federal government. Georgia has been a Republican stronghold since the end of the Dixiecrat era, but in November, President-elect Joe Biden became the first Democratic presidential nominee to win the state in nearly 3 decades, turning out enough Democratic voters and Republicans to force a runoff. Also, in 2018, Democratic superstar Stacey Abrams made a national name for herself in the Georgia governor's race, in which, by all indications, she should have been the winner, although her opponent, current Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, was at the time Georgia's Secretary of State. Despite the obvious conflict of interest in Kemp overseeing his own election, he insisted, and it was fraught with problematic evidence of voter suppression, particularly among African Americans. Kemp ultimately won by just 1 percentage point, but Abrams rallied the Democratic voters in the state and worked tirelessly on voter registration drives before turning out the vote for Biden in 2020. That said, Democrats' chances of winning the Senate aren't that great, at least on the surface. Yes, Biden was able to win a narrow victory, but it's hard to say whether the anti-Trump sentiment will carry over into another low-profile election, or whether Republicans who voted against Trump would be willing to hand the opposition party power over all three chambers. In the scheduled race, Senator David Perdue, whose first cousin Sonny is the state's former governor and current U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, faces Democrat Jon Ossoff, who made a name for himself when he came close to flipping a deep red congressional seat in 2017. Perdue has been a staunch supporter of outgoing President Donald Trump. The former CEO of Dollar General, he has a family name synonymous with Georgia politics and mountains of money behind him. Ossoff, however, has made a career of exceeding expectations. In the general election, Perdue finished less than 100,000 votes ahead of the Democrat, and they're neck and neck going into the runoff. The other contest features Kelly Loeffler, the incumbent Kemp appointed to the seat last December. A business executive who married the CEO of a financial services company she worked for, making her quite a wealthy woman, Loeffler later became a WNBA team owner, and the junior senator is arguably even more right-wing than Perdue, having sought and secured the endorsement of Georgia's incoming QAnon Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Loeffler faces off with Democratic Minister Raphael Warnock, the longtime senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist, the Atlanta church that Martin Luther King made famous. Warnock led by a little over 300,000 votes after the general election. Polling in both races is too close to call, and because whoever votes will have both races on the ballot, it's assumed that one party will win both seats. For Republicans, it's their last chance to keep at least some power in Washington. And for Democrats, winning control would save them from what's sure to otherwise be at least 2 years of Mitch McConnell blocking appointees and inflicting other methods of obstruction. As I noted, Republicans are seen as the favorites to prevail, but one thing is hampering their efforts, and that's President Donald Trump's refusal to concede that he lost this year's presidential election, despite President-elect Biden having won the popular vote by nearly 7 million and 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. Trump's stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality made framing the race as a way to prevent Democrats from holding all three branches of government problematic, as those who have acknowledged Trump's defeat risk losing his support and even facing his wrath. Trump has gone so far to disavow Kemp, and Trump supporters have even started chanting "lock him up" when Trump references the governor at rallies. To make it even worse, Trump's somewhat rogue legal team of Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell, who are working to overturn Biden's win in Georgia unsuccessfully, have gone so far as to tell Republicans in the state not to vote in the race unless Trump is given Georgia's electoral votes, even though it wouldn't even put a dent in his presidential loss. While Trump's deep unpopularity with a slight majority of Georgia voters is clearly what's most responsible for such a red state having flipped, he remains just as beloved by his supporters in a state whose division largely mirrors that of our nation as a whole. However, as the president continues to peddle baseless conspiracy theories about the election results, and with everyone from the courts to his own attorney general having acknowledged his loss as painfully legit, more and more Republicans elsewhere are distancing themselves from the soon-to-be ex-president, while Perdue and Loeffler have their carts firmly hitched to his wagon. That means, like the November presidential election, absolutely anything can happen. But one way or the other, what happens in Georgia will have a massive impact on U.S. public policy for at least the immediate future. That's it for this edition of Punk Rock Politics. I'm Mitch Maley, and I'll be back next week. Meanwhile, keep an eye out for news regarding our soon-to-be-launched Punk Rock Politics podcast, which will be available on all major platforms. Thanks, guys.